Dean Charter, Charter Road, speaking as a citizen. Over the last week, I have received a communication sent to another governmental body that included a vicious personal attack upon 2 Acton Selectmen and our town council. I offer the following comments to the writer and to the residents of Acton. I have not collaborated with any of my fellow selectmen nor shared my comments before now. I will not speculate here what might motivate an out-of-town resident to write such drivel and to continue to attempt to act as a schoolyard bully. I totally reject the notion that these repeated scurrilous attacks are in any way a pursuit towards good government. In fact, this sort of harassment is the direct opposite of such an aim, as it fosters a confrontational attitude, wastes huge amount of time and taxpayer money, and discourages other qualified individuals from volunteering for town service. Those that stage such attacks should be ashamed. Those that support or condone such attacks also should be ashamed. I would like to state for the record that those specifically called out in this most recent garbage letter, John Benson, Peter Berry, and Nina Pickering Cook, have my unwavering support, and that I have complete confidence in their integrity, intelligence, competence, and dedication towards the best interests of the residents of the town of Acton. Thank you.
Thank you. Other citizens' concerns?
Yes, as Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I walked in the middle of that, but I'm not exactly sure what it's about, but I will stand in support of watchdogs that look at minutes, compare minutes, and call attention to errors in the conduct of minutes, conduct of meetings. And I will also, I'm not sure exactly where you guys are on the Board of Selectmen goals, but the idea of addressing citizens' concerns. But sometimes I like to bring things to citizens' concerns because I want a public response. And so I appreciate that effort. One of the things that I heard this week is that Roland had told an official in a public meeting that he works for the developers and that's his job. So I would like a formal response to that, whether it comes through John's method for people to read the responses or whether it comes to a private response to me. Thank you. Hopefully it would be a public response, because I think it would be great if we got the actual issues that people bring forward and then the public response so that people can look at them even if they weren't here or missed the video. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens' concerns? I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Gail Sawyer for her work on the Memorial Day parade and celebration, and Jim McCrae for his work with the veterans. I think it was a successful parade and event, so I thank both of them for their efforts. John? Okay. The Acton Board of Selectmen will hold a public hearing on June 3rd, 2019 at 7:10 in the Francis Faulkner Hearing Room at Town Hall, 472 Main Street, Acton, for an order to show cause to determine a dangerous dog housed at 363 Arlington Street, Acton, Mass. The documentation concerning this hearing can be inspected during the public hearing at Town Manager's office during normal business hours. We've received a request from the dog owner's attorney to continue this hearing to June 3rd, 2019 at 7 p.m. Is there a motion?
The agenda says the hearing to be continued until June 13th. Is that the date we're?
Yeah.
June 13th.
Right.
Okay, so I would move then that the dangerous dog hearing, order to show cause, which was scheduled for June 3, be continued to Thursday, June 13th. Would that be at 7 p.m.?
Yes.
In the Francis Faulkner room.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Yeah,
There'll be a meeting scheduled for that Thursday?
yes.
Okay.
All right, motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Regional Housing Intermunicipal Agreement Amendment.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Russ from the Regional Housing Services Office, and I'm here as part of the annual amendment process to the intermunicipal agreement for the Regional Housing Services Office. I think you have a couple of summary slides in your packet, and I think that Lisa's bringing up the one on the screen, maybe? So today I'm going to start with just a quick overview of the RHSO and where we are, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions and to provide some input, and really to look for your vote and support for the amendment, which does require the Selectmen's signature on that. So here are the summary slides up there on the screen. Thank you. Oh, perfect. So the Regional Housing Services Office was started in 2011, and it was facilitated by MAPC through a 3 DLT grant process. So we started the effort in 2009, and it really took 3 years from concept to implementation. So it was something that really the towns worked very hard on. It was started through the town leadership, the town managers, in 5 of these towns. And through the process, it's proved to be a very sustainable model. We have added towns, towns have withdrawn, we've added staff's retired, we've moved offices, and we've moved lead communities. And we've still been able to provide the same level of support to the member towns. So, and when there was no precedence for this, when the intermunicipal collaboration got started, and so we didn't know, there was nothing to compare to see how has this group done it in the past. And at this point in Massachusetts, I think there's 20-something communities that are involved in similar regional collaborations. So I think that Acton, as well as the other communities, would be commended for their support through this model. So you can see here what the service model is. I think that we've done this before, that member towns pay in a membership fee at the beginning of the year. And essentially, it's a procurement model to purchase hours of technical assistance of housing. I'm the director of the office, that there are 4 people in the office, all with different technical skills and background. We all work independently as contractors to Concord, and I think together we work almost 70 hours a week. So it's a little bit more than 1 FTE, short of 2 FTEs in terms of how much support is given to all of the member communities. And yeah, so that's them. So in terms of our work plan, this is what we do every year. We focus on, we look at ourselves as a staff augmentation kind of model. We work really for the town staff, in particular in Acton for the planning department we report to. And a lot of the work that we do is monitoring the existing affordable housing. Of course, we help also new projects that are coming on board or whatever's going on in the town. But we've been very involved this year in the Anthem Village project, which has been through construction and sales, and the town has a very active monitoring role in that. We also help with refinancing or resales of deed-restricted properties, helping rental property managers with rent calculations and tenant certification, so that kind of monitoring work. We have a local support part of our work plan, and that's what is a sort of a variable kind of hours for each town. And for Acton next year, we're going to be helping with the housing production plan. So a housing production plan is a state, it's a housing planning tool that has state guidelines for what's to be in the plan, and it's good for 5 years, and so Acton's is coming up for expiration next year, so we'll be working on that. So that gives you some idea of the kind of work that we do. In terms of member communities, there's a maximum of 9 communities that have been identified as the top limit in the intermunicipal agreement. And we continue to dialogue with other neighboring communities. They need to be abutting is one of the requirements. And coming up next year, Burlington has given notice to withdraw, and Lincoln is considering rejoining. They were a founding member back in 2011, and then they decided to go their own way, and now they've seen the error of their ways, I guess, and they're coming back into the fold. And that doesn't impact the service level that Acton gets in terms of us providing services, though it does spread the fixed cost amongst more communities. So everyone would receive a slight decrease in the hourly billing rate. So that's always a plus for all the communities. Plus it provides additional hours for us, and we're always happy with that. In terms of the budget is mostly staffing, and here's probably more information on the budget than you're really interested in, but it provides some, you never know, some people kind of like this level of detail. FY19 current figures to FY20. The budget is put in the IMA amendment as Exhibit B on an annual basis, and that was something the town leadership wanted to do so that every year we had to come get your signature, and this way that every community was very proactively involved in the RHSO. So we do put the new budget in the amendment and on an annual basis come back. The IMA has a 3-year term, so the amendment for this year is really just having Burlington's withdrawal and updating the budget. So it's a very simple form there. And we're completing our 8th year of operation, and thank you for your continuing support. And we are always looking for comments and suggestions about how to be more helpful and valuable to the member communities. That's really our goal, there's so much housing that goes on everywhere, and it's our goal to assist as best suits each community. And each of the member communities are different in their approach to housing, how they've organized for housing, and so we aim to work as best we can.
Thank you. Questions? David?
Hi, so I understand that the office you serve this, variety of communities. Is there an interaction among the communities, or you just apply your services kind of individually to each community?
I think there's 2 ways that we share. One, we're able to bring best practices from the other communities when we're providing one-on-one service to Acton. And then the advisory committee, which is made up of 1 member of each community, meets on a quarterly basis. And in fact, we met this morning. So we share common projects that we're working on, and the community exchange between the communities is very rich. And this year we'll be providing, we have a section on our website, and part of what the offerings we have is what we call municipal resources. And we'll be doing a study of accessory dwelling units across all the areas, all the member communities, and that's like a hot topic. Every community is working on accessory dwelling units, so we can bring the RHSO member communities together in that way, as one example.
Thank you.
All set? So we need a motion for...
Move to approve the Regional Housing Service Office for FY20.
the municipal agreement amendment.
That's what we're voting on.
Okay.
So the motion would be to approve the amendment to the Regional Housing Services Office agreement.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Al Vojanek, part of the Finance Committee. I'm curious, could we go back one slide or two? I had a quick question with respect to, yes, with respect to the current hours. There's a pretty steep escalation for the town of Acton relative to the other towns. And I'm curious to know why that is.
That's because of the housing production plan, which is a significant deliverable.
Okay, that's all I had.
Tara?
Yes, a couple of questions. It's my understanding that the housing production plan is not required by the state, that the town can do it, and that it's been a useful tool in looking for a safe harbor, the 2-year safe harbor. But whereas we're embarking upon the 10%, I'm wondering why we would do a housing production plan. Because my goal is largely to use existing resources, and hopefully the housing production plan will be about creating more affordable housing for very and extremely low-income people using existing resources. And I have a different question after that. So that was my...
As I mentioned before, we really work on behalf of the town. So the town is looking to do a housing production plan, and so we're there to support that effort. I can say that in general, housing production plans are good tools to have in your toolbox should they be needed. Acton's not at 10% yet, though there's a lot of strategies in play, and I'm very aware of all that. And aside from the safe harbor, SHI counting, this housing production plan provides a good opportunity for community conversation and putting down a fresh look at where you are from the last 5 years.
Thank you. My last question is about the idea of creating more using condo buy down or kind of purchase program. It's my understanding that you can share trusts regionally, that if we had a unit or we had a town meeting article, for example, to put money towards condo buy down, that if the local Acton Community Housing Corporation doesn't want to engage in that there are other trusts in the region that are interested. I understand Sudbury uses Concord and back and forth. It's my understanding that that's possible. Is that true?
There are any number of organizational solutions to particular problems. And a trust is a municipal housing affordable trust, as the Massachusetts general law is it's just a bank account, and some trustees, what programs they undertake, under what contracts, can all be discussed.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the intermunicipal agreement amendment for fiscal 20. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Update on the South Acton parking?
Yes, thank you. Last week, we had a great meeting here in this room, a well-attended presentation of the parking study that we've been working on. The audience we had probably 30 or 40 people, a lot of great questions. And the next steps are to finalize the report based on the feedback, to work with the SATSAC and with the Board of Selectmen on implementing some of the policy recommendations. For example, the program made recommendations about demand-based pricing for how we price our parking lots. It made recommendations regarding how to better utilize the further away lots and get more people to go to them. And it made various other recommendations. So I look forward to a conversation with all of you this summer as we continue to look at that information. One other item I wanted to just bring to your attention, as we finalize the transaction for the Mr. Richards property, the parkers, the people that park there now are very concerned, and I think we did talk about this briefly, but I just wanted to let you know the plan, and if you have any issues, please let me know now. We're going to email them or tell them all that they can stay in their spot through the summer, so for July, August, and that whatever the board decides to do with that lot, we would have go into effect in September. So that would give them a few months to kind of not worry, and you, this board, a few weeks more to figure out what exact strategy you want to implement for that lot.
Questions? Dean?
I guess my question is, how much opportunity is there going to be for feedback from the board as this plan is developed and completed? Specifically, I'm concerned that I attended the forum last week, and probably the majority of the folks in the room were actually residents of surrounding towns that use our facility. And I think it's very important to make sure that no matter what comes out of the plan, that we optimize parking opportunities for Acton residents. I think it's important that we encourage these surrounding towns to develop some of their own solutions to the problems, including establishing parking lots in their town, more active shuttle operations. I don't think it's a good idea for anyone that we pave all of South Acton for the benefit of our neighboring towns. So I want to make sure that before these proposals go too far down the road, that you check back with us and we have a chance to critique them ourselves, and also give any member of the public an opportunity to weigh in as well. I think that's a more efficient way of doing it than have a completed plan come to us and then, we try to tear it all apart at the last minute. Thank you.
Anyone else, John?
Yeah, and thank you, Dean. I agree with what you have said. To me, my feelings about parking, it's crucial to me that we get people off of Route 2 and onto the trains to go to their jobs in Cambridge and Boston. And to do that, we've got to provide more assured parking, and then from the MBTA's end, they've just got to get reliable transportation, that comes on time every day, both in and out. And that's a real contribution we could make to the environment, and it's practical and attainable. Some of these parking lots we have to differentiate. The 1 Maple Street lot is an MBTA lot where we can't give resident preference. So I think what John, what you're doing there now with an annual lottery makes good sense. The Gordon Richards lot and the Jones Field lot, those are owned by the town, so we could set our own rules for Acton residents. And I would certainly, who's ever has parked there under Mr. Richards' regime, be given first preference to keep those spots, going forward, both through the summer and thereafter. And I think the same would be for the Jones Field spots, and that neither lot be subject to a lottery. I'm hopeful that after we purchase the property and Mr. Richards' year on the property ends, that we could use the additional space on the property to create the potential of 38 to 40, parking spaces. And they may certainly should all go to Acton residents and in the form of of a lottery, but those people who are there now should be, grandfathered in. And I think one of the things I was at a finance committee meeting last Monday, so I couldn't attend this meeting, but I did read the draft report. And one thing that it really didn't pick up on was the seasonal fluctuations in train use, which would bear on parking lot demands. From my own many years of commuting, the traffic is much heavier as the weather turns in late November through April. Summers are lighter as people are on vacation. And Mondays and Fridays during the week, people seem to work at home those 2 days. So there's fewer people on the trains and a little more availability for, for parking. And one thing that David has picked up in his studies is how, and this is a good thing, how many more people are being dropped off at the lot. So it is a little more traffic on the road, but more people are not competing for the available spaces. And as you think about pricing, remember all of these people who take the train in every day are typically buying a monthly pass. It's both for the commuter rail and for the MBTA, and that's over $300 a month now. So I want to get people off of Route 2 onto the train, and we don't want to add, if it's $5 a day, if it's $6 a day, I think we can sustain that. We don't have to jack up the prices and see it as a profit center. So thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I have several comments. First, I think that the parking study was excellent. They had a number of good recommendations there about how to draw people out of the main lot into the remote lots, and I think that's a very effective thing to effective way to maximize the use of our parking, and possibly even establish more remote parking, because there was talk about establishing a remote lot somewhere in North Acton at some point. I do think that we need to recognize, though, that the train station is a regional facility, and we have to work with our representatives and neighboring towns on that. I think we should continue the significant price break that we give residents. Right, right now the residents park for significantly less than out-of-towners in the main lot and certain of the nearby lots. I think we need to ask SATSAC for some final recommendations on what to do before we discuss them, and then we can just make the final decision as to what we want to put in place. One of the things that I also want to comment on, which was not part of the study, is that we use this lottery system for the reserved spaces. And I think that the lottery system is an excellent way of handling it when we have a new lot, like when the Maple Street lot first came out, or maybe when the Richards lot on September 1st. But the lottery system on a yearly basis is quite a burden for people. People set their lives around being able to make the train at a particular time. Where they put their kids in daycare, they have to coordinate their spouse's work schedule, because one of them drops off the kid, one of them gets on the train early, that one's, back home at a time to be there when the kids get off the bus or out of daycare or whatever it is. So I think it's the lottery system, where they might lose their space from year to year, is a very, very, very difficult thing. And I've heard from a number of people who are quite concerned about that. Personally, I think that after you get established, it should work more like the season ticket model. As long as you re-up, you get to keep your space. If you don't re-up, then you come back later, you go to the bottom of the list, again, just like a season ticket. Finally, I think that, as I was saying earlier, that, we should do many of the things that were in the report in order to maximize the usage of the spaces we have. I believe that we also need to continue to look into a potential parking deck on the site. I completely agree with Dean that we don't want to pave South Acton. In fact, I don't think that we want to pave any more of South Acton, frankly. But I do think that a parking deck is potentially effectively uses the paved space that we have, if you will. And I'm not saying it's a given, but I think it needs to be investigated further. And that I think so. And I'm kind of in favor of both directions myself.
Okay, I noticed that Magic had received a transportation grant with the various communities, and I don't know if the Transportation Committee is going to send a member to that committee. But that would be a place where we could talk about transfers from other communities to our lots.
Yeah, I can certainly look into that.
Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Dean?
just as a follow-up, I certainly agree with Mr. Martin about looking at the feasibility of a parking deck. I think just looking at the topography of the location, it looks like a great idea. And I think that would certainly make sense rather than establish a lot of other outlying lots, other than something extremely remote like North Acton or something like that. But I think I certainly second your idea about pursuing the parking deck.
Yes, as a further follow-up, I would agree with Dean. Yes, let's pursue the parking deck. I mean, again, it just fits with the whole idea of getting people on the train, providing assured parking. And I think the recommendations should come through SATSAC and from SATSAC to the board, and I think that's a good way to do it. On remote parking, last year I took a look at it and met with Doug Haley and said, could we have more remote lots in town? Could we use the lot behind the fire station? And he said the problem there is there's only so far out you can go in getting people from the remote lot to the train station, back out to the remote lot for the next pickup, back in for the next train, and it really couldn't go much beyond the 348, 364, Main Street parcel.
Yes, I agree with that. However, if we needed another van and driver, that's cheaper than a lot of additional parking, right? So, for example, I know we discussed at one time was remote parking somewhere in Nagog Park area. I have no idea whether there's demand there or not, but I know that was discussed at one time. And if there was enough demand, let's say, to fill a shuttle, that might, it could potentially justify the existence of an additional van of some size, right? And I'm not saying it's a given. I'm just saying that it's like a parking deck. It's something to consider, right? I agree that the vans that we have are stretched just about as far as they can with the train schedule. But, there are also opportunities, I think, for a cleanup van, right? Some of the people who commented the other night, and I've also commented to SATSAC, they're worried about if they arrive back on a later train than after the last van, they can't get back to their car in West Acton. Well, if we had an additional van, and maybe that one did a final round for I think it's the 745 or whatever train, and take them to any spot, just so if they had to work late one night, they can still get home. Just an idea. I'm not saying it's a given. I just think it's something to consider.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, let's just continue the good work you people are doing on this, and we look forward to recommendations, and we'll go to work.
Tara, do you have a comment?
Yes, I just hope that before you do a lot of work on a parking deck, that you hold a public hearing, because my understanding, or at least I remember, the room being full of people that didn't want a parking deck. And the other night, the pro-parking deck people were largely from out of town. And so I urge you, before you go do that again, if I remember there was like a year and a half worth of design and engineering before we abandoned the idea because of the outcry from the South Acton folks. Thank you.
So I'd just like to comment that it's not the people from out of town who want a parking deck. I can't tell you the number of people that have come to SATSAC meetings. 0 of them have been from out of town.
Yeah, and just, by way of background, particularly for John, there was a settlement of a lawsuit back mid-last decade between, I think it was the New England Conservation Law Foundation and the Big Dig people. And as part of that settlement, they came to Acton and said, we will build you a parking deck. Now, I was commuting in those days. News of that, was never conveyed to the commuters. It seemed to be conveyed to the local residents who came to a meeting here and voiced their opposition to it, and the plan ended at that. But if the commuters had known about it, I know among the crew that I would commuted with, we would have organized and been in here advocating very hard for that deck, particularly a deck that was free. The deck ultimately went to Beverly, and I think it's something that would be very worthwhile.
Yes, that's right. The money went away to Beverly before we could, come to consensus. So there wasn't just any reason to pursue it.
Okay. All right. Town Hall operating hours, John?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to announce to the board and start the feedback process of the pilot program that we're launching here in Town Hall. We've understood there's some demand for people that either work on the train or just can't get back to town for 5 o'clock anyways, to have an opportunity to use town services after 5. And so we're going to try out a pilot program where we stay open till 7:30 p.m. on Tuesdays. And we'll reorganize a few things with schedules, and we'll close early on Fridays. So what that would do, it would provide an extra few hours every Tuesday evening for people that want to make an appointment with town staff or just want to pop in and see a counter and ask a question or do whatever. And we think it will provide an enhancement to our customer service. And we're going to try it out for a few months and see how it goes. So if you have feedback, if you hear any feedback, we'd love to know, and then we can decide whether it's worth sticking with the schedule like that.
When does it start?
Good question. July 1st. So July 1st is a Monday. So the very first late Tuesday will be July 2nd. Hopefully we'll get a lot of people come see us.
They'll want a parking pass for the fireworks.
Yeah, we'll be available.
Okay. Veteran service.
So I wonder if Superintendent Light is here for the next matter. I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about 8 before 7.
Sure.
And just as he's getting to the mic, there's a request in your packet regarding the transfer that was approved by the school committee, and Superintendent Light is here to fill you in on all the details.
All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak for a moment. So as you're aware, we've been working on a capital plan for the last 5 years. And as a result of that work and the capital subcommittee that we formed as recently as this fall, we developed really a 13-year plan, and it had several prongs to it. One was to ensure that we had adequate funding in the annual school budget to proceed with capital expenses. Second one was to take on debt to the about $7.5 million worth of debt. And then the third was the establishment of a stabilization fund. At the recent town meeting, those had overwhelming support to move forward. And one thing that we knew in terms of the development of the stabilization fund was that we had intended to transfer approximately $1 million into the stabilization fund once it was created. It presented a conundrum in terms of scheduling of that because while Acton approved it in the first week of April, Boxborough town meeting doesn't take place until the middle of May. And so the stabilization fund was established as soon as the town of Boxborough voted to approve that. So at the school committee meeting after that, the school committee voted to do a budget amendment to move the $1 million from excess and deficiency fund into the stabilization fund. Once the district does that, that carries a stipulation that we notify the boards of selectmen, or select board in Boxborough's case, of both communities, and the towns have an opportunity to take a vote to disapprove of that budget transfer. It's some strange wording in the actual statute that governs that, but both towns have the opportunity to take a disapproving vote. Because of the timing of Boxborough's town meeting, there's a 45-day window in which either town can disapprove of that budget amendment after the school committee takes their vote. So the school committee vote was on May 23rd. 45 days after that would actually end up being July 7th, which places it into the next fiscal year. There was no avoiding that. There was no planning that we could have done that would have accelerated that process, because we simply had to make it through Boxborough town meeting before that stabilization fund was actually approved and created. But what we would like to do, and what the school committee voted to do on May 23rd, was a budget amendment to move the $1 million from the current excess and deficiency fund during fiscal year 19 into the stabilization fund, which would follow through on the plan that we presented publicly, both at the Acton and Boxborough town meetings, as well as spoke publicly on, since February. So knowing that we had a timeline conundrum on our hands, we actually reached out to DOR, the Department of Revenue, and specifically the Division of Local Services, to seek guidance on that. Dave Vertolino, who's our finance director, spoke to the director of that, and what she suggested is that what towns can do is, if the boards of selectmen don't intend to call a special town meeting, they can actually send back a letter to the regional district just indicating that they're waiving their right to call a special town meeting, and that serves essentially to expire the 45-day period. So what we were asking for was so that we could make that budget transfer this year. We're seeking your support in terms of waiving the town meeting, if you so choose, and to be able to proceed, and then we would make the budget transfer. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
David?
No questions.
John?
Yes. So Peter, what you're asking us to do, it's sort of the way the statute is, it's backwards a little bit.
It is, yeah.
That the selectmen in each town could just let it go and say we're comfortable with the transfer, or we could say we want to put it to the town to give them an opportunity to vote against this transfer. Is that it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So absent, with the budget amendment process, the regional school committee is able to actually authorize that transfer of funds unless one of the towns disapproves of the transfer.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual town vote ends up being to disapprove of the regional school committee's budget amendment.
Now, when you say within 45 days, that was within 45 days of that Boxborough's approval of the stabilization fund, or the school committee's approval?
The school committee's vote.
So
to have the budget
you could do
amendment.
it, when you say within 45 days, you could do it in 30 days.
Correct. As soon as, our understanding from DOR and the Division of Local Services is that if the towns waive that right, then we are able to proceed.
Okay. If we just took no action on this, and the 45 days, but that's into next year,
That goes into the next fiscal year.
That's the problem.
Correct. And, we have the opportunity and have been managing our fiscal resources soundly this year in anticipation of being able to make that budget transfer.
So you want to do it this year as opposed to next year?
Correct.
And the reason for that is?
The reason for that is the excess and deficiency fund rolls over as of July 1st. And so we have flexibility within E&D right now to be able to make that. If we wait through that period and E&D rolls over, we have the potential to bump up over that 5% cap.
I see. Okay. Have you discussed with your school committee council that this process is permissible?
So we actually went right to DLS, and they sent us the language themselves for what would be required.
So they've dealt with this before?
They've dealt with this. They actually sent us a sample letter from Ayer Shirley, who had done the same process. It was very different circumstances, but similar process, and I think it was Mary Jane Handy is the director at DLS. She actually said that, you know, the waiver language is consistent regardless of the circumstances of Ayer or whether it was here.
John, would there be any reason why we need to consult with Nina Pickering Cook?
I think that the language from the regulations is clear here. We did talk to Nina earlier today about sort of timing and whether, if there were a need for a town meeting, what the timing would look like. I think if the board's comfortable, we could move forward, or you could move forward. But I'm happy to reach out to her if you'd like.
She didn't voice any concern to you that joining into this waiver would be anything inappropriate. We wouldn't have any exposure.
No, I think the option would be to take no action or to consider the waiver.
So if it takes no action, just goes into next year, and that's not the situation
Correct.
you want to be in.
Correct, yeah. Our goal would either be to, you know, have you sign the waiver if you so choose, or to just immediately call for a town meeting so that we could get that in before the change in the fiscal year.
But then there's a timing factor in calling a town meeting. There's a notice requirement.
I think that to do it by June 30th, we would need to know tonight if you wanted to call a
We'd have
special
to do it
time.
tonight.
I would think so. To do it, and that would be tough to pull it off, but we could if you wanted to.
No. Just to be on the safe side, if we waited till our meeting on June 17th and in the interim just consulted with town council, that the waiver request did not create any exposure for us.
I think I guess my concern, I don't want to ever sound evasive, I just also am not an attorney, and I don't want to be in a position as the superintendent to give legal advice to the town about that process. I think the only thing I would say, we did banter it about a little bit internally, because both communities have, 2-week notification periods for town meetings. I think if either town potentially didn't call a meeting by June 23rd, we've had to wonder if that would automatically expire the 45-day window. We don't have any advice on that at this point. So I think, our goal is to, at least as a school district, try and be on the conservative side now and ensure that we have whatever processes are necessary to execute the transfer during FY19.
Okay, this is merely transferring $1 million of funds in your excess and deficiency account to the stabilization fund.
Correct.
Which both town meetings approved, and the funds would sit in the stabilization fund until there's whatever your procedure is for taking monies.
Correct, and so we actually set out, within the documents we provided publicly, we actually set out what the stabilization fund we anticipate it looking like for each of the 13 years. There's going to be several years coming up as we start to repay the $7.5 million debt, where we anticipate that we'll use some of that $1 million in order to continue capital projects during that time period. And then there are years in the midlife of that plan where actually we'll be putting money into the stabilization account during the regular budget process that actually goes then before town meeting, in order to be able to save for later projects like the Parker Damon roof that's going to cost multiple $1 million. This is really a one-time unanticipated transfer.
What would be the process for withdrawing money from the stabilization fund?
Withdrawing money from stabilization is a 2/3 vote of the regional school committee.
Okay.
Dean?
No questions.
All right. David?
To me, we would want to waive our right to call a town meeting if we're in favor of the stabilization fund, obviously. And I, for one, am in favor of the capital stabilization fund. I believe that this kind of fund, which has been applied in a number of different entities in the Commonwealth, is an effective way of making sure that the smaller capital needs for maintenance and other things, not truly maintenance, but replacement of things that are out of service life and things really get done. I'm in favor, so I would be in favor of waiving our right to call a town meeting.
Do we have to take a vote not to call a town meeting, or do we just approve the transfer?
I would say that if you are going to send this letter, that you would take a vote to waive that right, if that's what the board wants to do.
Okay. Well, I know we discussed the stabilization fund at ALG. And has the Finance Committee been involved in this at all?
So the Finance Committee actually had a seat at the district's capital planning table. And so Jason Cole was the representative, and he's been involved in the process since, I'm going to say, September, when we got the committee going. We also went and presented this to the FinCom during one of their public meetings, answered questions around that. And again, it's been our goal to be very transparent in that as we began the process of developing the stabilization fund, we anticipated transferring $1 million into it, or somewhere about that number. So we've been trying to talk publicly about that every opportunity we get, because we don't want this to sound like it's something that is coming out of a back channel, because that's
Right.
certainly not the case.
Yeah, no, I remember the discussion at ALG. So is there a motion?
I move that we waive our right to call a town meeting to object to the transfer into the capital stabilization fund of the regional school district.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
All right, thank you, everyone. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you. Do we have to sign anything?
I think Lisa has something for you, yeah.
Okay. Now, Veterans Service District Intermunicipal Agreement.
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned a few times, including at the last meeting, we've been working with Foxborough to put together a proposal for a Veterans Services District, which would mean that our Veterans Services Officer, James McCrae, would serve as a district director and provide services to both Acton and Foxborough. The process for implementing a program like this would be to create an intermunicipal agreement and then get that agreement approved by the State Department of Veterans Services. So what's before you tonight is a draft of the intermunicipal agreement. In the packet, it's actually signed by members of the board of Foxborough, but there are still some minor changes that I would like to make to it from a language standpoint. But I'd like to walk you through the substance briefly. So it's set up as a 3-year agreement, which may be terminated by either party for any reason with 30 days written notice. As part of the agreement, James will serve as the director, and he'll provide up to 4 hours per week to the town of Foxborough. He'll work primarily out of our office. He won't have, at this point at least, scheduled time in Foxborough. But everything that is part of this agreement is subject to the concept that after the first year, we're going to review it and understand how it went, what things we would need to modify to make sure that it works better going forward. Other parts of the agreement are that, with the financial part of it, Boxborough would cover the cost of 4 hours of James's salary and 1 hour of the Human Services Building Reception Office staff time per week. They would also pay an amount of fringe benefits, a factor for all the benefits that we pay, calculated at 61%, and then they would pay a portion of that, 10% portion of that. And they would also cover 10% of all the operating expenses in the VSO budget, excluding the actual benefits paid to our residents. And Boxborough would pay for all of the benefits that are paid to their residents. It would be processed through their accounting system. Jim would just be the agent that does those transactions. So that's sort of the framework, and Jim is perfectly doing a great job here in Acton, and the services that we're providing wouldn't change to Acton. We're actually, his schedule is such that we can add a few hours and be able to provide additional services to Boxborough, and it could work out just fine from an operational standpoint. So it is an intermunicipal agreement which requires the board's approval. So I hope that if you have any questions or comments, I'd like to have a discussion with you. I'm also planning to bring this to the Finance Committee to get any input that they have. I have been in contact with members of the Finance Committee over the last few months about this, but I will be prepared to present the whole thing to them in a few weeks. So are there any questions or comments?
Do we know how many veterans there are in Boxborough?
Well, the caseload was very small. Jim has been kind of easing into it a little bit now and helping out in the interim, and there's a few, like 1 or 2. And knowing Jim, he does such a good job that there may be more that realize that he's providing these services. And at that point, if it's taking more than 4 hours, we can say, hey, it's taking more than 4 hours, we need to talk. And I've talked to the town administrator, Ryan Ferrara, about this at length, and he's comfortable with this as sort of a starting point and taking it sort of and seeing how it goes.
Any questions, Dean?
No questions.
John?
Yeah. So before we vote on this, the Finance Committee will be taking a hard look at it and getting back with their comments. Is that correct?
I intend to present it to them, yes.
Okay, so you'll present that to them before we hear back from them and take a vote on it?
Yes, the way it's set up, it's scheduled to start July 1st, but I think we can take the time that's necessary to bring it back to you.
We have another meeting, right?
We'll have a meeting on the 17th, I believe.
Yeah.
So we can either bring it back to you at that point or figure out another time.
Well, the FinCom meets next Tuesday night, right? And yeah, and then you're going to want some, unless you get going on it now.
My understanding, we don't have one right now.
Okay.
I think if you were to email that out, that might make some sense.
Okay, so if we sent it out tonight or tomorrow, and it can be, okay. So it's a 3-year term to the agreement, is that correct?
Yes.
So how did you arrive at the number of, that's 10% for salaries and 10% for benefits, is that correct?
It's based on 4 hours of a 40-hour work week.
Okay, so if you look at the populations of the two towns, this will be a question you'll get. Between the two towns, there's 26,920 people. Boxborough has 4,996 of that amount. That's 18.56% of the total. Why are they paying 10%? I'm stealing your thunder. How was that arrived at?
Well, when we started talking about this, the caseload was actually 0. 0 veterans being working with 0. So I think 4 hours was a minimum to sort of get the service running and understand what people are there. The calculation wasn't based on the population of the community. No, it wasn't. I mean, and we're also, every year, Jim puts out a census. He sends it to families to try to get a sense of how many veterans we have in town. And he may do that in Boxborough. And at such time, we could perhaps look at the veteran population and look at that as a way to do a percentage.
Do they have any veterans right now that are getting services from their town?
1 or 2, and it's only since Jim has been helping out in the interim basis.
I see. Okay.
And the hours that it's been required, we're comfortable that it's 4 hours or less.
Okay.
Per
And then,
week.
I'm sorry. If you go to Appendix B of the agreement, professional services, it's $84,258. Is that the salary for Jim?
Yes.
And the fringe benefits, how are the fringe benefits almost $52,000?
This is just a factor that the town administrator in Boxborough applied to Jim's salary to account for the various benefits that we provide, insurance, all the other overhead items that aren't shown in his salary line item, but that the town covers. And we're attempting to account for that in this line item. And so that if the fringe benefits are that amount and they're covering 10% of it, that equals 5,000.
Okay, so the estimate is that Jim's fringe benefits, that would be pension contribution, medical insurance, would come to about almost $52,000?
It's not a precise calculation, but it's a factor that we're using to make sure that we're comfortably accounting for all of those various things, including general liability insurance and all the other things that are part of having someone employed for the town that Boxborough does not have to worry about in this case because they're employed by our community.
You're going to have to be, I guess, a more detailed analysis for the, for the FinCom, and I think ultimately us when we have to vote on it. That seems kind of high. I don't know.
It gives us additional fee. I would think the higher the better.
Say that again?
The higher the better from our perspective, because the higher it is, the more that we get. But yes, we can give you a breakdown of what that 51 is.
You're going to want that.
I mean, that number's more like factoring depreciation. It's not.
People can't hear you.
Go to the.
Sorry, my view for that line item would be more like calculating depreciation, right? When you're looking at that, it's not real dollars out. This is a calculation to figure out what the fee that we're going to be charging Boxborough is. If that is an aggressive number, it means that we get a higher fee from Boxborough for whatever those services are. So I would rather have that number be high and not miss any of the expense that we may or may not know come about. That's my personal opinion.
Would the fringe benefits be knowable? I mean,
Yes, we could. It may end up being a lesser number than this, but we can certainly calculate them.
it should be based on, I just don't want arguments with Boxborough when you do your annual, they're supposed to pay 4 times a year, they're 10%, and, what makes up that fringe benefit line. I think
We can provide additional detail.
Yeah, we really should
They signed the
Very clear
agreement.
what it is that, that they're buying into, so you don't get stuck with them and we're fussing back and forth.
Dean?
Yeah, just as a point of history, in previous years when I was on staff here, and we would calculate things out for bonds and for services the town might provide, we always carried a 50% for benefits over and above whatever the employee's salary was. So I think, what John has presented certainly tallies with what the practice was 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay,
David?
Yes, and I think it, also accounts for things like, or should account for things like office space, right? So Jim has an office, which, the space costs so much a year. So, I mean, if Boxborough is signed on and signing the agreement, then there's not going to be a dispute every time they have to pay.
Okay.
All right. Is there a motion?
No, I think we need to, before we vote on it, we need, it's a financial matter, and the FinCom should take a look at it and
Yeah,
get back to us.
I would definitely agree with that. That's something should go in front of the Finance Committee.
If there's some urgency, I don't know whether the meeting to be called on the 13th is just for one purpose or whether we could add another item.
Oh, no, thank you. I think we could work with the schedule of the scheduled meetings and make it work.
Okay.
So I'll be back with this in a few weeks.
Okay, so now we're on to the consent items. Number 9, letter of support, Powder Mill Place, LLC, LIP. Number 10, one-day alcoholic beverage license, New England Malay Ali Association, Narra Park, June 15th, 2019. 11, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Boston Women's Rugby, Narra Park, June 15th, 2019. 12, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Middlesex Senior Co-Housing, Narra Park, June 20th, 2019. 13, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Paul Cook, Narra Park, July 27th, 2019. 14, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Melissa Van Olen, Narra Park, June 15th, 2019. 15, accept grant Recreation Department for $500 from the Massachusetts Cultural Council to cover costs for the Recreation Department's Winter Carnival on February 2nd, 2019. 16, accept gift Recreation Department for $1,000 from Loyal Companions to support production costs for the Recreation Department's 2019 Summer Concert Series. 17, accept gift Recreation Department for $500 from the Acton Lions Club to support the 2019 Summer Concert Series. Selectmen's reports. Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
Yes, I move that we approve consent items 9 through 18 inclusive.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Is there any
Motion.
further business?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.